Have you ever imagined a woman chained to a tree in the middle of nowhere, left for dead, only to rise and bring down a billion-dollar empire built on lies? Today's story isn't just emotional, it's unforgettable. It's about truth, redemption, and the quiet power of one voice that refused to stay silent. If stories like this move you, if they make you believe in courage, justice, and second chances, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel to support more heartfelt stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. The morning began like most others on Elijah Moore's farm, with silence, cold, and the quiet sigh of a man who'd come to expect very little from the world. Autumn had crept in overnight, frosting the edges of the barn roof and turning every blade of grass brittle and silver. The sun, still a thought behind the horizon, hadn't yet stretched its fingers across the flat Indiana land. But Elijah was already awake. He stood in the kitchen, a chipped enamel mug of coffee cradled between his hands, his back to the creaking stove and his eyes on the line where sky met field. The coffee was lukewarm, yesterday's grounds reheated. But it did its job, just like everything else on this land. Barely. The kitchen hadn't changed in 20 years. The linoleum was worn smooth where boots had walked, the wallpaper peeling near the windowsill where his mother once kept potted herbs. She'd been gone for a decade now, cancer having taken her quietly. His father had gone first. Heart attack, in the fields, still gripping a shovel handle. Elijah had been 23, too young to own the weight of a legacy, too proud to let it fall. He'd been fighting to keep the farm alive ever since. 3 missed payments on the mortgage. The drought hadn't helped. The rain came late this year, and when it came, it was all thunder and no water. The corn was stunted, the beans patchy, the bank was circling, and Elijah, stubborn as ever, refused to sell. He sipped the coffee and turned toward the porch. His dog, Boone, a mutt with floppy ears and a limp from chasing tractors, trailed at his heels. The sky had begun to bloom with that dusty orange of a Midwestern sunrise. There'd be frost on the fence rails, and the irrigation pump in the backfield had been making a noise he didn't like. But first, he needed to check the south fence line. He pulled on his denim jacket, worn soft by the years, and grabbed his bolt cutters from the hook beside the door. The south line ran near the old oak tree, a landmark his grandfather used to call the soul of the property. A tree older than any living Moor, its massive branches twisted like arms reaching toward heaven, its roots deep in the history of the land. It had witnessed births, deaths, and every hardship between. The frost crunched under his boots as he crossed the pasture. Boone bounded ahead, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Elijah's breath came slower, heavier, his muscles aching from a life spent working what no longer worked for him. As he neared the tree, something strange caught his eye, a flicker of color that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was trash, maybe a plastic bag blown in from the road. But as he stepped closer, the frost-covered grass gave way to something blue. Fabric, a woman's blouse torn and tangled in the rough bark of the oak. Then he saw her. Slumped against the tree, her arms bound tightly with heavy metal chains, was a woman, young, pale, barely conscious. Her legs were bare, scraped and bruised. One shoe was gone, the other dangling from her foot. Her dark hair was matted to her face and her lips were cracked, her skin raw from exposure. For a moment, Elijah froze. He'd seen many strange things in his years on the land. Injured animals, drunk teenagers passed out in his cornrows, even the occasional wrecked car in the ditch. But never this. Never a woman chained to his grandfather's tree like some forgotten ghost. He approached slowly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft, calm, like he might speak to a spooked horse. She stirred. Her eyes opened, barely, brown, glazed, rimmed with red. "Please," she whispered. "They might come back." Elijah dropped to one knee, already unhooking the cutters from his belt. "Ain't nobody coming back while I'm here," he murmured. "Let's get you loose." The chains were thick, industrial, not something anyone picked up from the hardware store down the road. It took all of his strength to get the cutters around the links, and even then, the steel groaned like it was alive. She flinched at each snap. He worked by quickly, his hands steady despite the cold. He saw the marks on her wrists, raw, bloodied, the skin broken in places. Whoever had done this hadn't cared if she lived or died. When the last link fell, her body slumped forward. Elijah caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. "I got you," he said softly. "I've got you." She didn't speak again, just closed her eyes and leaned into him like a child seeking warmth. He carried her to the truck parked by the old tractor shed, bundled her in his coat, and laid her in the passenger seat. She was trembling. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "I'm Elijah," he said, starting the engine. "I'm taking you home now. Just hold on." Her voice was barely audible. "Clara," he looked over. "Clara?" "Clara Whitmore." The name struck him like a bolt. He nearly stalled his truck. Whitmore, everyone knew the name. Whitmore Industries, grain magnates, transportation, pharmaceuticals, real estate, billionaire old money. And Clara, he remembered her face from the news. The heiress. Missing 2 weeks, the media circus, conspiracy theories, no ransom, no suspects, just vanished. And now she was here, on his land, chained to his oak. He drove the rest of the way in silence. The farmhouse hadn't seen company in years, not like this. Elijah carried Clara inside and laid her gently on the old couch in the living room. The fabric was patched and faded but clean. He stoked the fire in the cast iron stove and brought blankets from the hall closet. Boone lay nearby, ears perked, eyes watchful. In the kitchen, he warmed broth on the stove, poured a glass of water, and dug through the bathroom cabinet for bandages. His hands moved on instinct, guided by a life of practical care. Fix what's broken. Mend what you can. When he returned, she was awake. Barely. "You're safe here," he said, kneeling beside her. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you again." She blinked slowly, her lips parted. "You shouldn't. You don't know what you're getting into." "I don't care," he said. "You were left out there like an animal. That's all I need to know." He helped her sip the broth, then cleaned her wrists with warm water. She didn't protest, just watched him with hollow eyes. "I know your name," he said gently. "You've been on the news." Her jaw clenched. "Then you know why I can't go to the police." He hesitated. "Why's that?" "Because it's bigger than you think." Her voice cracked. "They're everywhere." "Who?" "My uncle, his men. They own everything, the cash, the media. If they find out I'm alive—" Her words trailed off. Elijah didn't ask more. "Not yet." "You'll rest first," he said. "Then you'll tell me everything when you're ready." Her eyes filled with tears. The first real sign of emotion since he'd found her. "Why are you helping me?" He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had planted corn, buried his parents, fixed broken fences, and dug graves. "Because my mama raised me to protect people who can't protect themselves," he said quietly. "And because my daddy always said a man's only as good as what he does when no one's watching." She wept then, soft, broken sobs into the crook of her arm, and Elijah sat with her, silent, the fire popping in the stove, the world outside turning from frost to morning. Later, she fell asleep in the guest room, his mother's old room, with quilts folded neatly at the foot of the bed and lavender sachets in the dresser. He watched from the doorway for a while, then went downstairs to the porch, lighting a match with one hand and an old cigarette with the other. He hadn't smoked in years, but today was different. The land stretched before him, quiet and still. The oak tree stood in the distance, its branches bare, its roots deep. He knew two things for certain. One, whoever had left Clara there would come looking, and two, he wouldn't let them take her again. Not while he still had breath in his body. The first rays of sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, turning the old farmhouse gold. Dust motes floated lazily through the air, like tiny particles of memory too stubborn to settle. Clara sat at the worn oak table, cupping a steaming mug of chamomile tea Elijah had made her. Her hands trembled, not just from the trauma she'd endured, but from something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. Safety, not the kind that came with security guards or gated estates. This was the kind of safety born from silence, from the warm scent of fresh bread cooling on the counter, from the tea curled at her feet, from the man who moved quietly behind her, cracking eggs into a cast iron skillet like he did it every morning. Maybe he did. Elijah wasn't one for small talk. He moved with a kind of steadiness that felt almost unnatural in her chaotic world. His boots scuffed the floor as he walked. His shirt hung loose over broad shoulders. His face was unreadable, but not cold. Just quiet, thoughtful. He slid a plate in front of her without a word. Scrambled eggs, 2 slices of bacon, a single orange wedge cut neatly in half. Clara stared at the plate. "You don't have to eat it all," he said, finally breaking the silence. "But it's hot." She nodded, picked up her fork, took one slow bite. It was salty and simple and real. And for some reason, it made her eyes sting. She hadn't cried last night, not really. She'd been too numb, too shocked to let the emotions surface. But something about the gentle clink of Elijah's spoon in his coffee cup, the way Boone sighed at her feet like he already trusted her, it chipped at the armor she didn't even know she still wore. "I never imagined I'd end up here," she whispered. Elijah looked up. "Where'd you think you'd be?" She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Not chained to a tree, that's for sure." He didn't smile, just waited. "I was supposed to be in Chicago," she said. "Board meeting, investor updates. We were finalizing a new logistics hub, millions in federal contracts. I was wearing a gray pantsuit and heels that hurt. And then I walked into the parking garage." Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard. "There were 2 of them. I didn't see their faces, just gloves, a rag, a sharp smell, and then nothing. I woke up in a truck, hands zip-tied, duct tape over my mouth. I thought I was going to die. But instead, they brought me here, to that tree, and left me." Elijah nodded slowly. "And now you're here." Clara nodded too, though her eyes stayed fixed on the table. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you need to," he said gently. She looked at him then, really looked, at the calluses on his hands, the faint scar on his temple, the way his eyes didn't flinch when she spoke about being kidnapped and left to rot. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough." A pause, a flicker of something passed between them, uncertain, unspoken. "But there, Elijah," she said softly, "if my uncle finds out I'm alive, you'll be in danger. He doesn't leave loose ends." He leaned back in his chair. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't find out." "We?" she echoed. "You're not in this alone anymore." She blinked rapidly, trying not to cry again, but the tears came anyway. She covered her face with her hands and let them fall silently. She was tired of pretending to be the iron-willed executive, tired of being alone, tired of everything. Elijah didn't say a word. He just stood, walked to the sink, and came back with a dish towel. He set it gently beside her hand. Then he sat again, waiting, letting her be. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. Later that morning, Clara stood by the window watching the chickens peck at the frozen ground. She had traded her designer shoes for a pair of Elijah's thick wool socks. His flannel shirt swallowed her frame, but it was warm, comforting, like the house itself. "This place is beautiful," she murmured as Elijah entered the room. He followed her gaze out the window. "Wasn't always like this. We used to have more land, more livestock, but things got hard after Dad passed. Then the drought came, then the bank." "I know that story," she said softly. "Different version, same ending." "Yeah," she turned to face him. "My father built Whitmore Industries from nothing. He was a poor farm kid from Iowa, worked his way through school, started the company with a single grain elevator and a used truck. He taught me about integrity, about doing things right, even when it costs more." Elijah leaned against the wall. "Sounds like a good man." He was, but after his stroke, things changed. Uncle Robert took over operations. Promised to streamline things, but what he really did was gut the soul out of the company. Started cutting corners, firing whistleblowers, and then the money laundering started. "You're sure?" Elijah asked. Clara nodded. "I saw the numbers. Shipments that didn't make sense. Invoices for non-existent equipment. Warehouses in places we didn't operate. I confronted him. He laughed in my face. Told me I was just a spoiled little girl with a calculator. He underestimates you." She smiled faintly. "He always did." "You said you had proof." "I do." She pointed to her coat folded on the couch. "There's a flash drive sewn into the lining. Everything is on it, emails, ledgers, surveillance footage from our logistics center in New Orleans." "And your plan?" She hesitated. I don't have one. I was going to the FBI. But after what happened, I don't know who I can trust. Robert has deep pockets, friends in places that shouldn't be for sale. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. I know someone. Name's David Boone, retired federal agent. Used to help farmers like us push back against big agriculture takeovers. He lives off-grid now, but I can reach him. You trust him? With my life. Clara exhaled. Then that's where we start. They spent the afternoon preparing. Elijah's old truck was reliable, but he checked the fluids anyway. Clara helped where she could, fetching tools, refilling the thermos, watching the tree line with wary eyes. They were leaving at first light, driving 3 hours north into the woods. You know how to shoot? Elijah asked as he cleaned the rifle that had once belonged to his grandfather. Clara shook her head. I'll teach you. She nodded. Okay. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they shared a simple dinner, vegetable stew and cornbread. Boone rested by the fire, snoring softly. The house creaked with the settling cold, but inside it was warm. Elijah pulled a heavy wool blanket from the closet and draped it over Clara's shoulders. You take the bed tonight, he said. I'll sleep on the couch. I don't want to put you out of your own room. He smiled. I've slept in barns. A couch is luxury. She chuckled. Thank you. As she climbed the stairs, she paused at the landing, looked back at him. Elijah? Yeah, she hesitated. Why are you helping me? He didn't answer right away, just stared into the fire. Because I was raised to do what's right, and because, maybe I was waiting for something to matter again. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, turned, and disappeared into the darkened hallway. Elijah didn't sleep much. He sat up most of the night, staring at the fire, listening to the wind, thinking about how strange life could be. One day you're worrying about crop yield and leaky pipes, and the next you're harboring a billionaire's daughter with a target on her back. But somehow it didn't feel strange at all. It felt like purpose, like something his father would have been proud of. The next morning, just as the sky was beginning to gray, Clara found him outside feeding the chickens. Her hair was pulled back, her boots muddy. She looked like she belonged. Coffee's ready, she said, smiling. Best words I've heard all day. As they walked back to the house, the frost crunching under their feet, Clara said quietly, I had a dream last night. I was back under the tree, but this time I wasn't scared. I stood up, broke the chains myself. Elijah looked at her. That's because you're stronger than you think. She didn't respond, but something in her eyes shifted, and somewhere deep in the earth beneath them, roots stretched just a little further. The morning fog curled low over the fields as Elijah and Clara drove north, the truck bouncing gently over old back roads that wound through Indiana farmland like lazy rivers. They had left before sunrise, slipping away in the quiet while Boone trotted beside the fence, sensing their departure but not barking. The countryside blurred by in shades of gray and amber, barns standing in silhouette against the early light, their wood aged and sun-bleached. Clara sat wrapped in one of Elijah's flannel coats, her eyes fixed on the horizon, though her thoughts wandered far from it. How much farther? She asked softly, breaking the long silence between them. About an hour, Elijah replied, eyes on the road. Boone's place is tucked deep into a pine forest. He likes his privacy. Sounds like the kind of man you trust, Clara said. I do. He saved my father's life once, kept a corrupt grain inspector from shutting us down when my dad wouldn't bribe him. Clara nodded slowly. Corruption has a way of trickling into every corner, doesn't it? Elijah cast a glance at her, catching the way her fingers rubbed the fabric of her coat nervously. You all right? I don't know, she admitted. I keep replaying the moment I woke up under that tree, the sound of chains, the cold, and then you walking toward me like something out of a dream. Elijah didn't respond at first. He kept his focus on the road, but his grip on the wheel tightened. You're not there anymore, he said finally. You're here now with me, and we're going to make things right. Those words hung in the air, not as a promise, but a vow. The truck passed into forest land, the landscape shifting into dense pines and narrow dirt paths. A hawk soared above, its call echoing over the treetops like a warning. Elijah slowed as the trees grew tighter around the road, and finally they reached a clearing. The cabin sat in the center, simple and quiet, smoke curling from its stone chimney. No power lines, no mailbox, just a wooden porch, a rocking chair, and a man already waiting with his arms crossed. Boone, Elijah said, stepping from the truck. David Boone was in his late 60s with a beard like white steel wool and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a dark vest over flannel and jeans tucked into weathered boots. Elijah Moore, Boone said, extending a firm hand. Wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. Boone looked over at Clara, who had stepped hesitantly from the truck. This her? He asked. She's the reason we're here. Clara stepped forward, squaring her shoulders despite the tremble in her limbs. I'm Clara Whitmore. Boone's brow rose slightly. Is in the missing Whitmore? She nodded. The very one. Boone didn't say more. He simply turned and held open the cabin door. Come inside. The inside of the cabin smelled like cedar and old books. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a gentle light over a table stacked with maps, papers, and radio equipment. There were shelves full of law books, an old hunting rifle mounted above the hearth, and a kettle already steaming on the stove. Boone motioned them to sit. No small talk, he said, settling into a chair across from them. Tell me why you're here. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out the flash drive, placing it gently on the table like it was made of glass. This, she said, contains every piece of evidence I could gather. My uncle has been laundering money through Whitmore Enterprises. Millions, maybe more. Using grain terminals and farm acquisitions to clean cartel funds. Boone stared at her, his expression unreadable. I've seen the news, he said. You vanished 2 weeks ago. FBI said they were investigating. Your uncle made a few tearful public pleas. He's lying, Clara said. He staged the whole thing, tried to break me, thought no one would find me. Boone took the flash drive and stood. He crossed the room and slid it into an old laptop, fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the crackling of the fire. Clara's breath caught as pages of files opened. Names, numbers, locations, photos of shipments, spreadsheets that no one outside the company was ever meant to see. My God, Boone muttered. He scrolled faster, eyes darting between columns. Then he froze, frowning. This is more than I expected, he said. You've got enough here to sink him. Maybe take down half a dozen others with him. Then help us, Clara said, her voice steady. Boone looked between them. I know people, good people, men and women who haven't forgotten what justice means. But they're scattered now, burned out or buried in desk jobs. It'll take time to coordinate. Can you protect the data? Elijah asked. Boone nodded. I've got a satellite uplink. Secure cloud storage, encrypted. No one's cracking it. Clara leaned forward. Then what do we do? Boone's eyes locked onto hers. You disappear. Clara blinked. What? Until this hits, you stay hidden, off the grid, no calls, no emails, no banks. If your uncle catches wind of this before we're ready, he'll finish what he started. Elijah spoke next. I've got a hunting cabin on the state line. My dad built it. No address, no plumbing, no paper trail. We can lay low there. Boone nodded. It'll do. I'll handle the rest. He rose, crossed to the stove, and poured steaming tea into 3 mismatched mugs. He handed one to Clara, then to Elijah. Clara sipped. It was bitter, herbal, but warming. The kind of tea you drank not for flavor, but for clarity. Thank you, she said. Boone studied her. I saw the footage from the docks in Louisiana. You didn't just copy files. You went into warehouses. You filmed faces. You risked everything. Clara nodded. You're braver than you look, Boone said. She smiled faintly. So I've been told. That night, they stayed at Boone's cabin, sleeping on old cots in a spare room lined with survival gear and emergency rations. Clara lay awake long after Elijah's breathing steadied. The wind rattled the windows. The fire popped. But her mind wouldn't settle. She got up quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and stepped outside into the cold night air. The stars were bright, brighter than she'd ever seen them. In the city, light polluted everything. But out here, the night sky was vast and wild. She sat on the porch steps, pulling the blanket tighter. A few minutes later, Elijah joined her, his footsteps light on the wood. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Too much noise in my head. He sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. They watched the sky in silence. I used to think success was about numbers, Clara said quietly. Profits, growth, shareholder returns. But all those numbers mean nothing when someone can erase you with a signature and a smile. Elijah turned toward her. You're more than a number. She looked at him. So are you. Their eyes met, and in that stillness, something shifted, like a hinge clicking into place. Elijah, she whispered, thank you for saving me. He shook his head. You saved yourself. I just showed up at the right time. She leaned against his shoulder and he didn't move. The quiet wrapped around them like the night itself. I don't know what happens next, she murmured. Whatever it is, Elijah said, you won't face it alone. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the sound of wind in the trees, of distant owls calling. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed him. The next morning, Boone handed them a burner phone, a map, and 2 packs of supplies. I'll call when it's safe to come back, he said. Clara hugged him, surprising them both. Be careful, she said. Boone nodded. You too, Miss Whitmore. Elijah and Clara drove off just after dawn, heading west toward Elijah's hidden cabin, toward uncertainty, toward a future built not on boardroom charts or family legacies, but on truth, trust, and something quietly growing between them. As the truck disappeared into the trees, Boone turned and lit his pipe, watching the rising sun paint the sky gold. Hold fast, he muttered. The storm's coming. The gravel road disappeared behind them as Elijah and Clara ventured deeper into the woods, the truck's tires crunching over fallen needles and loose stones. The trees grew taller here, older, their trunks straight and proud like sentinels. The road was barely wide enough for one vehicle, and sunlight broke through the canopy only in scattered shafts, gilding the forest floor in streaks of gold. They didn't speak much during the drive. Words felt too small for the weight they were carrying. The air between them, though quiet, was rich with unsaid things, gratitude, worry, something like trust, and something deeper that neither dared name just yet. Elijah's hunting cabin sat near a bend in a creek so narrow it didn't even appear on most maps. The structure was humble. A single-story, log-built shelter with a tin roof, a stone chimney, and a small porch crowded with stacked firewood and rusted lanterns. Ivy climbed one side and pine needles blanketed the roof. The only sounds were birdsong and the whisper of wind through trees. This is it, Elijah said, pulling the truck to a stop. Clara stepped out and breathed in the crisp air. It smelled of damp earth and pine resin. The silence felt different here, not empty, but sacred. It's beautiful, she said. Elijah gave a modest shrug. It's quiet. That's what matters right now. Inside, the cabin was rustic but cared for. The main room held a wood-burning stove, a few armchairs draped in old quilts, and a small table beneath a window that overlooked the creek. The bedroom held a twin bed and a small dresser. The bathroom was an outhouse 50 yards away, and the only electricity came from a solar panel that powered 2 lamps and a small radio. This was your dad's place? Clara asked. Built it himself the year I turned 13. Said every man needed a place to think. Clara walked slowly through the space, her fingers trailing along the windowsill, the edges of the books on the shelf, field guides, old novels, a Bible with pages softened by age and use. Feels like a place that remembers things, she said softly. Elijah nodded. It remembers who built it and what it was for. Solitude, safety, reflection. They spent the afternoon settling in. Elijah taught Clara how to start the wood stove and showed her the hand pump near the creek that served as their water source. Together they gathered firewood, filled canteens, and checked the food supplies Boone had packed for them. Dried beans, rice, oats, canned soup, powdered milk. Clara was quieter than usual, not withdrawn but contemplative. Elijah gave her space, knowing some wounds took silence to mend. That evening they sat on the porch, bowls of warm lentil stew balanced in their laps, watching the sky change color. Do you ever get lonely out here? Clara asked. Elijah looked out toward the trees before answering. Sometimes, but it's the kind of lonely that teaches you things, like how to sit still, how to listen. She nodded. I think I need that kind of lonely. A breeze rustled the pines. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted once, twice, then fell silent. After dinner, Clara stood and stretched, her muscles sore from the long day. I'm going to wash up, she said, picking up the lantern. Elijah rose too. You'll need boots. That trail to the outhouse gets slick. I'll manage, she smiled. I've survived worse than slippery moss. He watched her go, her figure shrinking into the dusk, lanterns swinging like a gentle heartbeat. Inside the cabin, Elijah cleared the bowls, then sat by the stove, stoking the embers. His thoughts wandered, to his father, to Boone, to the weight of what Clara had shared. She carried so much, and yet, somehow, she stood straighter every day. When she returned, her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. I found the wild mint you mentioned, she said, holding out a handful of small green leaves. Thought it might be nice in tea. Elijah smiled. You're adapting fast. I'm learning from the best. They brewed tea together, the steam rising in ribbons, the scent fresh and grounding. They didn't speak much as they drank, but the silence wasn't awkward. It felt like home. The next morning, Elijah woke early, as was his habit. He left Clara sleeping and stepped outside, breathing in the chilled dawn. Mist clung to the creek, and the air was full of birdsong. He split wood for the stove, checked the perimeter trail, and scanned the forest edge for signs of movement. It had been a long time since he'd needed to worry about being followed. But Boone's warning echoed in his mind. He returned to find Clara awake, sitting at the table with Boone's notebook in front of her. I want to understand everything, she said. Not just what he did to the company, but how he did it, so I can explain it when the time comes. Elijah nodded. That's smart. They spent the morning reviewing files, laying out the timeline of her uncle's operations. Clara explained the coded accounts, the shell companies, the rerouted shipments. Elijah asked questions, not the kind born from suspicion, but from genuine desire to understand. She appreciated that. At midday, they ate oatmeal with honey and dried apricots. Afterward, they hiked upstream to collect clean water, Clara marveling at how clear it was. I never realized how loud the world was until we left it, she said, kneeling to fill a jug. All the noise, all the pretending. Elijah crouched beside her. And here, everything's honest. They sat for a while on a mossy log, listening to the creek gurgle past. I think I'm falling in love with the quiet, Clara whispered. Elijah didn't answer right away, but when she looked at him, his eyes were soft, open. I think I'm falling in love with the way you've changed, he said. Her breath caught. I'm not the woman I was in those boardrooms. No, he agreed. You're stronger now. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. But I feel safer with you than I ever did in a house full of guards. They walked back hand in hand, not speaking, not needing to. That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder grumbled low over the hills, and rain fell in steady sheets. They lit candles and sat close by the stove, reading passages from an old novel Elijah's mother had loved. Afterward, Clara pulled her blanket tighter and asked, Do you think the world will believe me? I do, Elijah said. And if they don't, then we'll show them, with truth, with proof, with grit. She nodded, pressing her head to his shoulder. The fire flickered beside them, throwing dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they found shelter in more than just the logs and stone. They found it in each other. And as the wind howled through the trees, Clara finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer running. She was returning. To herself, to the truth, and to something that felt an awful lot like home. The morning sun filtered through the pine needles, casting slanted beams of light across the forest floor. Elijah stirred first, blinking away the remnants of sleep as he listened to the gentle creak of the cabin settling in the cool air. Beside him, Clara still slept, her breathing steady, her expression soft in a way he had not seen since the day they fled her uncle's empire. For a moment, he let himself believe that the outside world could not reach them here. But the illusion, as always, was fleeting. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb her, and stepped outside. The morning was brisk, the kind that kissed the cheeks with cold but promised warmth later in the day. The scent of wet pine and wood smoke lingered in the air. Elijah inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the silence, then set about his morning routine. Firewood, water pump, checking the trail down by the old creek bend. Inside, Clara stirred. She sat up slowly, her hair tousled, her mind still adrift between dream and waking. But the scent of coffee, real, strong, percolating over the wood stove, pulled her the rest of the way to consciousness. She rose, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and padded out onto the porch. "You beat the sun again," she said, her voice husky with sleep. Elijah turned, offered a quiet smile. "Just barely?" They shared coffee in mugs that didn't match, sitting side by side on the porch steps. The kind of morning that didn't need words. The kind that stitched hearts together quietly, one heartbeat at a time. Later that morning, they walked down to the creek together, collecting fresh water and checking the traps Elijah had set for rabbits. Clara was getting used to this life now. The feel of the earth beneath her boots, the sound of her own breath in the quiet, the simple rhythm of work done by hand. As she knelt by the creek, she caught her reflection in the water. The woman who stared back at her was leaner now, her skin kissed by the sun, her hair pulled back with no thought for vanity. Her eyes looked older, yes, but steadier. She didn't flinch anymore when twigs snapped in the forest. "Elijah," she said softly, not turning, "what happens if we don't win?" He crouched beside her, washing his hands in the stream. "Then we keep fighting," he said. "We fight until there's nothing left to give, and then we fight some more." She turned to him then, studying his face. He wasn't a soldier or a cop or a spy, just a farmer. And yet she trusted him more than anyone she'd ever known. That afternoon, they reviewed the files again. Clara had memorized every detail of her uncle's corruption. The routes, the shell corporations, the encrypted backups. But Elijah had suggested something new, mapping the timeline against real-world farm foreclosures. What they found chilled them both. Each acquisition her uncle's network had made was preceded by a series of misfortunes, accidents, faulty inspections, surprise audits. Clara's heart sank as the pattern emerged. It wasn't coincidence. It was sabotage. "They were hurting people on purpose," she whispered, "to drive them out, just like they tried with your family all those years ago." Elijah nodded slowly. "They almost broke us, but we held on." Clara set down the file and leaned back in her chair, the weight of it all pressing on her chest. "I can't fix what's been done," she said, "but maybe I can stop it from happening again." By evening, the wind shifted. Elijah noticed it first, the way the trees bent just slightly westward, the way the birds went quiet. He stepped outside, boots crunching softly over pine needles, eyes scanning the tree line. Clara joined him a moment later. "Something's wrong," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. He nodded. "Feels like we're being watched." They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Elijah took Boone's old radio and tuned it carefully. Static buzzed through the speakers, interrupted only by short bursts of coded chatter. Clara sat beside him, watching, her eyes wide and alert. "You recognize it?" she asked. "Encrypted," he said, "but it's military style. Too precise for amateurs." Clara swallowed hard. "He found us." Elijah didn't argue. He packed a small bag, flash drives, cash, a pistol he hadn't shown her before. Clara's heart raced as she watched him slide it into his belt, a silent acknowledgement that their time in the pines was running out. "We need a plan," she said. "I've got one," he replied. "We don't stay. We move before they close in." She nodded, then took a shaky breath. "Elijah, if something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen," he cut in gently, reaching for her hand. "I'm going to get you out of this. I swear it." And for once, she believed him. Not because he was invincible, but because he was steady, rooted, like the pines. That night, they packed what they could. Clara took only what mattered: the flash drive, the burner phone, the locket her mother had given her as a child. Elijah loaded the truck under cover of darkness, headlights off, doors closed without a sound. As they pulled away from the cabin, the forest seemed to sigh behind them, a long, slow exhale, like it too had been holding its breath. They didn't look back. They drove through the back roads in silence, the moonlight painting silver trails across the windshield. Clara sat with the flash drive clutched tightly in her palm, her eyes locked on the road ahead, as though willing it to stretch farther and farther away from danger. Elijah's hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw was set tight. He knew this terrain, every shortcut, every detour, every hunter's path that didn't show up on maps. And yet tonight, the familiar woods felt different. Hunted. They reached an old ranger station around 2 a.m., abandoned for years, but still standing. Elijah checked the perimeter twice before signaling Clara to come in. Inside, it smelled of mildew and cedar. A map of the county hung on the wall, yellowed with age. He lit an oil lamp and unrolled a newer, updated map on the table. "We're here," he said, tapping the paper. "Boone's contact is about 40 miles southeast. A retired journalist named Margot Slate. She's already been feeding leaks to trusted media outlets. If anyone can get this story out safely, it's her." Clara leaned over the map, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "And your friend, David, the ex-agent? He's working behind the scenes, but he's not mobile like us. We're the messengers now." Yet for a long moment, they both stood silent, listening to the ticking of Elijah's old watch. Outside, the wind picked up again. The trees whispered to one another, telling secrets in languages older than men. "You ever think," Clara said slowly, "that your father built that cabin not just to escape, but to survive?" Elijah looked at her. "He always said the land speaks to those who stay long enough to listen." Clara smiled faintly, then let out a shaky breath. "I heard it before we left. I heard it say go, not out of fear, but because it's time." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, they slept in shifts. Elijah by the door, shotgun propped beside him. Clara on a cot in the corner, the flash drive hidden beneath her pillow. Each breath they took was deliberate, each heartbeat, a quiet act of rebellion. By dawn, they were on the road again, heading southeast toward whatever came next. They had no guarantees, no backup, no clear path forward. But they had each other. And the truth. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The morning was still when they rolled out of the ranger station, the sun just beginning to stretch its fingers through the haze of pine and dust. Elijah drove with practiced calm, the silence between them comfortable and necessary. Clara stared out of the passenger side window, one hand curled around the flash drive inside her coat pocket as if she could keep it, in what it held, safe just by holding tight enough. The truth always came at a cost. She knew that now. The road they followed had no name, only the faded grooves of a once well-traveled path now reclaimed by weeds and wildflowers. It wound through forgotten farmland, past silos collapsed into themselves and barns stripped bare by time. The world out here seemed suspended in a sepia haze, caught between memory and decay. "Boone said she lives off-grid," Elijah finally said, his voice breaking the morning hush. "Said Margot Slate doesn't use cell phones, doesn't trust digital anything. We'll probably be lucky if she has a generator and coffee." Clara nodded, adjusting the scarf around her neck. "I don't care about coffee. I just hope she believes me." "She will," he said simply. She looked over at him, at his rough profile, the lines time and weather had carved into his face, the quiet strength he never flaunted. She envied that certainty. Her own heart was a storm, of fear, of resolve, of shame, of something like hope trying to rise again after too long buried. They drove for another hour in silence, past an old church with no steeple, past a general store boarded shut, and a school with broken windows. Every piece of landscape reminded Clara of what was at stake. Real towns, real people, not just numbers and quarterly reports. Eventually, Elijah pulled over beside a rusted metal sign, half swallowed by overgrowth. The paint had faded almost to nothing, but the letters Tremont Quarry, Keep Out, were still just legible beneath the rust. "This is it," he said, glancing at the notebook in his lap. "Boone said Margot lives up past the old quarry, near the second water tower." Clara looked around. "You think she's still alive?" "I think she's careful," Elijah said. "There's a difference." They continued on foot, backpacks slung over their shoulders, Elijah leading the way down a narrow path framed by saplings and thorny bushes. The air grew cooler as they descended into the basin where the quarry once thrived. The trail was littered with broken stones, rusted bolts, and the bones of machines left to rot. Nature had begun its slow reclamation. Grass breaking through cracks in concrete, saplings rooted in the wheels of abandoned loaders. At the base of the quarry, the world fell into silence. Clara paused to catch her breath, the stillness pressing in around her like velvet. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. Elijah turned, listening. "What?" "No birds." He frowned, adjusting the strap on his backpack. "We're close." They followed the trail up the other side of the quarry, where the forest thickened. Trees grew dense here, sheltering the land from direct sun. Wildflowers bloomed in secret places, and the air smelled of cedar and damp stone. Finally, just as Clara thought they might be lost, they saw it. A clearing surrounded by tall grass, and at its center, a modest wood-frame cabin. Smoke curled from a metal chimney. A clothesline was strung between two trees, sheets fluttering gently in the breeze. "She's here," Elijah murmured. Clara felt her heart race. They approached slowly. Elijah raised his hand in greeting and called out, "Margot Slate?" The screen door creaked open. A woman in her late 60s stepped out, holding a double-barreled shotgun with the ease of someone who'd used it before. Her gray hair was twisted in a bun, and her eyes, sharp, wary, intelligent, locked onto Clara instantly. "You Boone's friend?" she asked, voice like gravel. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said calmly. "He told us to find you. Said you could help." Margot's gaze swept them up and down. She looked at their boots, their clothes, the shadows under her eyes. Then she lowered the shotgun and stepped aside. "You've got 2 minutes to tell me something worth listening to," she said. "Then we'll see if you are worth a pot of coffee." Clara took a breath and stepped forward. "My name is Clara Wells. I have evidence linking my uncle, Robert Wells, to money laundering, farm sabotage, and illegal land acquisitions across 6 states, and I need help making the world believe it." Margot studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back into the cabin. The inside of the cabin was dim, lit only by slivers of light filtering through the slatted blinds. The air smelled of old paper, black coffee, and something faintly metallic, gun oil, Clara realized. Stacks of newspapers and file boxes lined every surface. Faded photos hung on the walls. Young men with cameras in war zones, protest marches, political rallies. There was one of Margot herself in flak gear, crouched beside a UN convoy. "I stopped trusting suits a long time ago," Margot said, filling a dented kettle and setting it on the propane stove. "And billionaires even earlier." Clara remained standing. "I'm not here to defend billionaires, I'm here to stop one." Margot raised a brow. "You're a Wells." "I was," Clara said. "But I've seen what he's done, what our company's become. I tried to stop it from the inside. That's how I ended up chained to a tree." That got Margot's attention. "Chained?" she asked. "As in literal chains?" "Yes," Elijah said quietly. "I found her. On my land. They were sending a message." Margot turned to him, her gaze narrowing. "And you are?" "Elijah Moore, farmer, her friend." Clara glanced sideways at him. That word, friend, landed with unexpected weight. Margot nodded once and poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. "Sit." They sat at the kitchen table while Margot pulled out a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen. Her movements were methodical but not unkind. "Start from the beginning," she said. "No summaries, no drama, just the facts. If I think you're lying, I'll ask you to leave. If I think you're telling the truth, I'll help you burn your uncle's empire to the ground." Clara took a long sip of coffee, steadying herself. The bitterness helped. Then she began. She told Margot everything. How she uncovered discrepancies in the company ledgers. How she traced the money through shell companies. How farm after farm fell like dominoes under suspicious circumstances. She explained the secret memory drive, the kidnapping, the chains, the silence she'd been forced into. Elijah added the names of people he knew who'd been forced off their land, the stories that never made it into courtrooms or news cycles. Margot listened without interruption, her pen scribbling notes in sharp, practiced lines. She didn't react much. No gasps, no head shakes, just the occasional nod or squint of focus. When they finished, the cabin fell quiet. Margot leaned back in her chair and stared at them, then took a long, slow drink from her mug. "God damn," she said softly. "You weren't kidding." Clara exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "You believe me?" "I believe you saw what you say you saw, but what you're up against." Margot gestured around them. "That's not a scandal. It's a system. It's blood deep. You poke it wrong and people disappear." "I know," Clara said. "I almost did." Margot tapped her pen against her notes. "This flash drive of yours, backed up?" "Twice," Elijah answered. "One with us, one with a trusted contact." "Good. You're not dumb." She pushed back from the table and stood. "You're staying the night. It's not safe to be on the road again this close to dusk." Clara blinked. "You're not going to kick us out?" Margot gave her a half smile. Kid, you just handed me the biggest story of my career. And I've been waiting 30 years for someone to come in here with fire in their eyes and something worth lighting. She turned toward the back room, then paused. You want the truth out there? Really out there? It'll take more than files and fury. It'll take a voice. I'll give mine, Clara said. All of it. Good, Margot said. Because come morning, we start recording. The next morning dawned overcast, the kind of sky that made everything below it seem more serious, more fragile. Margot's cabin hummed with quiet purpose. She moved like a soldier preparing for war. Camera batteries charging, mics being tested, lighting adjusted for the dull natural glow. Clara stood at the bathroom sink, staring into the cracked mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the CEO in training, the polished daughter of an empire. In her place was someone leaner, rougher, but not broken. Not anymore. Elijah waited by the woodpile, splitting logs with the calm rhythm of a man who knew the value of silence. Clara stepped out to join him and, You sleep at all? He asked. A little, she said. Had a dream I was back in the boardroom, except everyone had chains instead of neckties. He stopped mid-swing, met her eyes. You scared? Yes, he nodded. Good. Means you still care about the outcome. She took the axe from him and tried a swing of her own. It landed unevenly, but the log cracked enough to make her grin. Look at that, she said. Corporate raised and still dangerous. They shared a quiet laugh. Inside, Margot cleared the table and set up a pair of chairs, camera aimed toward a neutral background. She laid out a stack of consent forms, more symbolic than legal in her off-grid world, and invited Clara to sit. I want you to start from childhood, Margot said. People don't care about numbers. They care about people. Paint them a picture. Clara took a deep breath and leaned into the camera. I grew up thinking my family stood for something good. We were told we helped farmers. We gave them tools, infrastructure, loans, logistics. My father used to say, feeding the people feeds the future. She paused, her voice thickening. Then he had a stroke, and my uncle took over. The language changed, profits became paramount, risk became a game, and farms, real generational farms, became assets to be acquired, not partners to be supported. As she spoke, the hours peeled away. Her tone deepened, her expression sharpened. Margot nodded subtly behind the camera. Clara continued, I found the trail almost by accident, a set of invoices that didn't match up, one small anomaly in a network of deception. I've followed it because I believed the company could still be saved. I was wrong. Elijah watched from the doorway, arms crossed, pride and worry tangled across his face. Clara's voice broke once, only once, when she described the oak tree. The chains weren't just meant to hold me. They were meant to silence me. But when Elijah cut them loose, I realized something. Truth doesn't need a microphone. It needs witnesses. Margot ended the recording and lowered the camera. The silence after was heavier than applause, deeper than judgment. She looked at Clara with something like awe. You're going to change things, she said. Clara shook her head. I just want to give people their farms back. Elijah stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You're giving them more than that, he said. You're giving them a reason to fight. Outside, storm clouds gathered. That evening, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows of Margot's cabin in wild, slanted bursts. Thunder rolled over the hills like an old beast waking from sleep. But inside, the air was charged with a different electricity, the kind that came from purpose. The files were uploaded, scheduled for release across 3 independent news platforms. Clara had signed her name to them all. No more hiding, she'd said. Let them come. Margot double-checked her sources. Each article was backed by evidence, statements, and timelines. There were names, some real, some withheld for safety. There were numbers, damning, undeniable. And there were images of foreclosure notices, of dried-up wells, of families holding on to land with bare knuckles. We release at 6 o'clock a.m., Margot said. That gives us maybe 6 hours before the pushback starts. I want to be with my father when he reads it, Clara said softly. Elijah looked over from the stove, where he stirred a pot of beans and rice. You think he'll understand? She thought about that for a long time. I think I hope he remembers the man he used to be, before Robert convinced him that legacy was the same thing as control. Margot stood and stretched, her joints popping. I've done my part, she said. Now it's yours. Whatever happens next, don't let the story die in the noise. You've got one shot to make people care. The storm continued through the night, but inside they slept. Not peacefully, not deeply, but with a kind of exhausted trust. At dawn, Margot's old satellite modem blinked green. The files were live. The first news outlet had picked it up. Then the second. Then Clara's phone rang. It was Gloria Chen. We need to talk, Gloria said, her voice clipped. You just blew the lid off half the Midwest's biggest agricultural conglomerate. Every board member is panicking. I have reporters calling me at home. Clara took a breath. Tell them I'm coming in. You sure about that? No, but I'm done running. She ended the call and turned to Elijah. I have to go back. Face them. Finish this. He nodded slowly, eyes steady. I'll go with you. Their fingers intertwined without words. Outside, the storm had passed. The first light of dawn spilled across the wet earth, turning the mud to gold. And somewhere in a high-rise office, a phone began to ring. The black town car waited at the edge of Margot's clearing like a shadow with perfect timing, quiet, persistent, and inevitable. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, a small travel bag on one shoulder, her expression unreadable. The flash drive that had once held the darkest truths of her family's empire was gone now, its contents already released, scattered online like seeds on the wind, impossible to gather again. Elijah placed her second bag into the trunk of the waiting car, his movements slow, almost reluctant. The early morning mist clung to the trees, wrapping the world in silence, as though even nature held its breath for what came next. You don't have to do this alone, Elijah said softly, stepping close. Clara met his eyes. No, she replied, but I do have to do it. Behind them, the cabin stood quiet, its wood still warm from the fire they'd shared the night before. Margot emerged with two thermoses in hand. Her silver hair glinted in the rising light, her face carved with wisdom and a trace of mischief. For the road, she said, handing one to Clara. Don't drink the corporate coffee. It'll kill you quicker than the headlines. Clara managed a small laugh, took the thermos, and wrapped Margot in a grateful hug. Then she turned to Elijah, her gaze lingering, memorizing. No more promises were exchanged. Everything that needed to be said lived in the silence between them. She stepped into the car, and the door closed with a soft finality. The drive into Chicago passed in reflective quiet. Forests gave way to fences, fences to subdivisions, and finally glass and steel. Clara watched it all blur by, change unfolding frame by frame. When they crossed the final bridge, the Wells Enterprises Tower came into view, rising above the skyline like a monument to ambition. 47 stories tall, its mirrored windows reflected the morning sun, and nothing of what had been buried beneath its foundation. Inside the lobby, marble gleamed under her boots. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, polished, clean, clinical. A new security guard watched her approach. Clara Wells, she said clearly. I have an appointment. The receptionist gave a curt nod. You're cleared for floor 42. The board is assembled. Of course they were. The elevator carried her upward with a speed that made her stomach shift. When the doors opened, Clara stepped into a long hallway of muted light and polished oak. At the far end, the boardroom waited. She entered without hesitation. 10 people sat around the massive table, industry veterans, family confidants, legal advisors. Her father was there, his shoulders thinner than she remembered. So was Robert's former lieutenant, now acting CEO. Bernard Matthews sat across from the window, flanked by legal counsel. And to Clara's surprise, Gloria Chen was there too. No one spoke. Clara walked to the center of the room, the sound of her heels clicking like punctuation marks. She placed her notebook on the table, then looked up. You've read the articles, she said calmly. Let's talk. A heavy silence followed until Matthews leaned back, the edges of a smirk playing at his mouth. You've made quite the mess, Clara, he said. Shareholder panic, legal threats, reputational collapse. And for what? Nostalgia? Guilt? For the truth, she replied, steady as stone. Gloria gave the faintest nod. Matthews sneered. You've thrown away a legacy. Clara turned to her father. Dad, is that how you see it? He looked at her, eyes tired but open. I see a name I don't recognize anymore. I see a company my brother twisted into something it was never meant to be. You're not chairman anymore, Matthew snapped. No, Clara said, but I am a shareholder, and I've brought enough proxy votes to call for a motion of no confidence in the board. Murmurs erupted. You don't have that kind of authority, someone scoffed. I do, Clara answered, thanks to 72 independent farm owners across 4 states. Their class action filings transferred temporary voting rights to me. We filed the motion this morning. Matthew's face went crimson. You weaponized emotion. No, Clara said. I gave it a voice. Gloria rose. She has the legal standing and the moral one. The harm caused under this banner demands acknowledgement. Today is where that begins. A long pause fell. Then her father raised his hand. I support the motion. And slowly, one by one, the others followed. Matthew stood, his voice low with fury. You're burning this place to the ground. Clara met his eyes. No, I'm clearing what's rotten, so something better can grow. He stormed out. When the doors closed behind him, Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. Her knees trembled slightly, but she stood firm. The hallway outside the boardroom felt quieter now, like something unresolved had finally exhaled. Gloria joined her by the elevator. Elijah's downstairs, she said softly. Clara's head turned. He's here? Said he just wanted to be near, in case you needed him. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and stepped into the elevator. The lobby lights were brighter now, and the world was waiting. Reporters stood clustered behind velvet ropes, shouting her name, their flashes flickering like lightning. Security held them back, but barely. Then she saw him. Elijah stood just beyond the crowd, his jeans dusty, arms crossed, expression calm. He hadn't come to fix things. He'd come to be there. And that was enough. Questions flew at her. Clara, will you lead the company now? Do you regret what you've done? Are you still a Wells? She paused, turned toward the crowd. I was born into this company, she said, but legacy doesn't excuse silence. I won't lead something broken. I'll rebuild something better. And then she walked straight to Elijah. He opened the security gate, and she stepped through, took his hand without a word. Together they left the building, not with an empire, but with each other. The train ride back to Cedar Grove was quiet. Clara leaned against the window, Elijah's hand steady in hers. The city fell behind like a fading echo. Ahead, farmland stretched wide under the evening sky, open, honest, waiting. They'll come after you, Elijah said. I know, she whispered, but I'm not running. I'm going home. They arrived just before sunset. The town looked the same, but Clara wasn't. Later, as they walked the gravel path toward Elijah's farmhouse, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Wells, came a crisp voice. Deputy Chief Harrison, Office of the President. The White House would like you to speak at the upcoming agricultural summit. Clara blinked. Why me? You started the conversation. Now we want you to help lead it. She hung up, stunned. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Bad news? She turned to him slowly, a small, amazed smile forming. The White House, she said. He grinned. You ever been to Washington? She laughed, the tension breaking. Not like this. He offered her his hand. Well, he said, reckon I could learn the ropes. And side by side they walked on, into the deepening dusk, into the waiting future, into the kind of story that mattered. The jet whispered across the sky, slicing through clouds like a thought too heavy to speak. Clara sat by the window, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze anchored to the distant silhouette of the Capitol dome. It emerged slowly from the mist below, a symbol of decisions, of power, and of the promises that built nations. Beside her, Elijah fidgeted in his seat, clearly uneasy in a blazer that wasn't his. He tugged at the collar, brow furrowed. You sure they let farmers in that building? He asked, his voice dry, only half joking. Clara smiled softly without looking away. They'll let you in. Whether they understand you, that's a different matter. Elijah shook his head and turned to the window. This place wasn't built for truth, just speeches. That's why we came, Clara said, her voice calm, to make one that matters. They landed at Reagan National under a pale, early sun. A sleek black government SUV waited at the curb. The driver, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut, wore a small eagle pin clasped over a stalk of wheat. USDA liaison, he greeted them. Welcome to Washington. Elijah muttered, feels more like the Twilight Zone. Clara squeezed his hand as they slid into the back seat. The car moved steadily through the marble heart of the Capitol, passing towering monuments and streets laid out like a chessboard of influence. Clara had been here before. Years ago, once as a rising executive during a youth summit, her last name opening doors like magic. But that visit had been ceremonial. This one was real. Inside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, they cleared security and were ushered down wide hallways echoing with quiet importance. Elijah was directed to the gallery, where an aide offered him bottled water and a badge. Clara, meanwhile, was led into a bright conference room, sunlight pouring in through tall windows like scrutiny. At the long, polished table sat a mix of faces: senators, economists, scientists, and corporate executives. Some she recognized from fundraisers long ago, when the Wells name was currency and Clara had been its rising heir. Her nameplate waited: Clara Wells, former CFO, Wells Enterprises, advocate for agricultural equity. That last title sat on the table like a challenge. The president had not yet arrived, but tension simmered just beneath the room's surface. Some watched her with interest, others with suspicion, a few with something like hope. Clara took her seat and placed a small notebook before her. No spreadsheets, no data charts, just stories. The moderator cleared his throat. We now recognize Ms. Clara Wells for a citizen address on rural equity, land ethics, and corporate accountability. Clara stood, her heart beat loud in her chest, not with fear, but with weight, with the gravity of what she carried. I grew up in boardrooms, she began, voice steady, raised among profit margins and acquisition strategies. I was taught that success was measured in expansion, and that a failed farm was just a number on a chart. She paused, letting the truth settle into the room. But numbers don't show you soil that's turned to dust. They don't show a farmer selling off the tractor his grandfather used to buy insulin for his wife. They don't show what it feels like to walk land that once fed a town and now can't hold water. Some leaned forward. My uncle believed small farms were inefficient. That scale was the only future. But it wasn't about agriculture. It was about control, of supply chains, of water rights, of lives too humble to fight back. Clara's voice tightened. They didn't break the land. They broke the people working it. A quiet ripple moved across the room. I was part of that machine. I signed the reports. I followed the logic. Until one day I couldn't anymore. Until someone chained me to a tree for asking questions that made the wrong people nervous. There was an audible gasp. I'm not here for pity, she said quickly. I'm here because the system we built, policies, incentives, deregulation, were designed without stepping foot in a real field. And that blindness has cost us communities, clean water, and generations of honest work. She looked around the room, then directly at a man in a navy suit, the corn lobbyist. Have you ever walked a soybean field in July, praying for rain, while the bank waits for your foreclosure? He didn't answer. I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who finally saw the consequences up close. And I came to tell you this. If you want rural America to survive, not as a profit center, but as the soul of this nation, you must start listening to the people who grow your food. Her voice dropped, but somehow felt louder. This is not reform, it's redemption. Silence, a long one. Then, slowly, a few claps. Then more. Not everyone joined, but enough. The session ended in a flurry of handshakes and business cards. Clara barely registered it, her mind already elsewhere. Gloria appeared by her side, quiet and proud. You shook something loose in there, she said. They'll have to listen now. I don't want them to listen, Clara murmured. I want them to rebuild. Before Gloria could respond, a presidential aide stepped forward. Miss Wells, the president would like to speak with you, privately. In a quiet room overlooking the south lawn, the president met her not with speeches, but with a legal pad filled with handwritten notes. We're launching a real rural task force, he said, with budget authority. real teeth, and we want you to lead it. Clara stared at him. You'd be our bridge, he added, between Washington and the people you just spoke for. She swallowed hard. Sir, I live on a farm now. That's why we want you. And if I say no, then we'll try to find someone else like you, but I doubt we will. Later, she found Elijah under a tree, waiting on a bench like he belonged there more than anyone inside those buildings. They offered me a job, she said. The kind you can't turn down. The kind I'm not sure I can accept. He listened. I'd have to live here, travel. I'd be gone more than I'm home. He didn't flinch. Clara, I didn't fall in love with you because you made things easy. I fell in love with you because you do what's right, even when it's hard. Her voice cracked. You'd wait? I'd visit. You'd come home. And when it's done, we'll build our farm, just like we dreamed. That night, back in Cedar Grove, the Harvest Festival lit up the town square with cider, wine, laughter, and hope. Clara wore jeans, boots, and a flannel that still smelled of Elijah's barn. She danced with him under hanging lights, twirling between hay bales and generations of memory. And when the mayor asked her to speak, she did, honest and trembling. I'll be gone a while, she said, but I'm coming home because this is where my roots are. And if I have anything to say about it, this is where the future starts. Later, sitting on the tailgate of Elijah's truck, she looked up at the stars above. You think Washington's ready for me? She asked. He grinned. No, but they will be. And beneath the soft, silver glow of a harvest moon, the land listened, alive with truth and full of possibility. Washington moved fast. Emails, meetings, press briefings, policy drafts. Clara woke before the sun, spent her days in windowless rooms debating words like land stewardship and rural equity, and fell asleep most nights with policy binders spread across her lap like blankets. But every Friday, without fail, she received a letter. Not a text, not an email. A handwritten letter on lined paper, always folded twice, always smelling faintly of cedar. From Elijah. The first arrived a week after she left. Morning, darling. The chickens miss you. So do I. The East Field's greening early this year. You'd be proud of the irrigation system, the one you insisted we fix before the soil gave up on us. Mary says hi. So does Sheriff Emma. She dropped off pie and pretended it was just in case I forgot how to cook. I didn't, but I ate it anyway. Yours, E. She read it 3 times. The second came with a drawing, a clumsy sketch of their porch swing with fauna reserved for C scribbled across the top rail. The third came after her first major speech at the National Sustainable Agriculture Conference. It simply read, "You were fire. I saw it on the live stream at Mary's." Even the tractors paused. Love you. Come home soon. By the time the fourth letter arrived, Claire had started keeping them in a small wooden box in her apartment. A plain little thing Elijah had built her from repurposed barn wood, with a carved acorn on the lid. She read the latest one by the window, the Capitol dome glinting far in the distance. We harvested early. Not much, but enough. You were right. That new planting schedule works. Sarah's taken over the Northfield rotation planning. She's scary efficient. The kind of person I'd trust to manage a small country or a barn full of goats. I told her you said hi, and she said, tell Clara to stop fixing the country and come weed the carrots. I miss you, not just the late-night porch talks or the way you organize the spice cabinet alphabetically, though I miss that too, but the you that sees when the wind comes up strong and smiles like you belong to the land. It's not the same without you, but I'm holding the fort, for now. Come home soon. Clara folded the letter slowly and held it against her chest. It wasn't homesickness, it was something softer, sadder, stronger, longing wrapped in gratitude. She walked out onto her small balcony, the city noise muffled by height. In her hand, the letter fluttered like a leaf. She looked west, even though she couldn't see the farm, the fields, or Elijah. But in her heart, they were there, still growing, still waiting, still hers. The headlines had come and gone, but the truth remained, settled deep into the roots of Cedar Grove like a stubborn seed waiting for rain. Clara Wells stood alone at the edge of the eastern field, the wind tugging gently at the hem of her worn coat. In her gloved hands, she held a slender oak sapling, its roots damp from the nursery and wrapped in burlap. Before her stretched the scarred ground where the fence had once stood tall and firm. Before the storm, before the unearthing, before the reckoning, the soil still carried the memory of what it had held. Buried barrels, rusted signs, secrets thick as oil. And now, beside the ravine, lay a stretch of cleared earth, roped off and surveyed, but no longer hidden. Elijah stepped up beside her, silent at first, the familiar scent of cedarwood and earth clinging to his flannel. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence was grounding, like the land itself recognizing its own. Clara glanced over her shoulder and offered him a soft smile. I figured it should be something with roots. He looked down at the sapling. Oak? She nodded. They say it grows slow, but it endures. There was a beat of silence as the wind curled around them, carrying the scent of rain and the faint memory of wildflowers no longer blooming here. He crouched beside her, fingers brushing the dirt. Where you plant it matters. Right here? Yes, she whispered. Right here, where the lie was buried, where we begin again. They worked in quiet tandem, hands muddy, breaths misting in the cool evening air. She held the sapling steady as Elijah packed the soil around its base, patting it gently, reverently. When it was done, Clara leaned back on her heels, wiping a streak of dirt across her cheek without care. She gazed at the fragile tree, barely taller than her waist, its bare branches reaching skyward like questions still waiting for answers. It won't grow fast, she said, her voice low, a tremor of emotion woven through. Elijah rose beside her, brushing the soil from his hands. He placed one calloused palm over hers, anchoring her in the moment. That's all right, he said, eyes on the sapling. It's not for us. Clara turned to him, blinking back the sting in her eyes. Then who is it for? He met her gaze with something deeper than affection, something like faith. It's for the ones who come after. The words settled over her like a benediction. In the weeks since the press conference beneath the old oak, the world had shifted around them. Media crews came and went. The EPA set up mobile labs. Lawyers walked through the farmhouse in polished shoes, asking for files, old deeds, access to the land. Clara gave them everything. No red tape, no delay. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword anymore. It was penance. The Wells Foundation had redirected its entire quarter's budget to fund medical screenings, water filtration, and soil restoration in Cedar Grove and the surrounding counties. Every dollar Clara once owned had been returned, not to the boardrooms, but to the people whose lives had unknowingly grown over poisoned ground. She'd said no to every network anchor, turned down late-night show invites and lucrative book deals. Even the offer to run for Senate, which Gloria had called a guaranteed win, was dismissed with a shake of her head. No more platforms, she had said, just roots. Instead, she stayed at the farm with Elijah. Together, they repaired fence lines and cleared brush. Elijah replanted native grasses, while Clara worked with local volunteers to test the fields and purify the well. Their days were filled with sweat and soil, and their nights, when the stars spilled wide over the valley, were filled with quiet prayers whispered through touch, through laughter, through shared silence. One morning, Clara found a handwritten note tucked into her jacket pocket. Elijah's handwriting, neat but firm. We don't have to fix the world, just this piece of it, one honest day at a time. She kept that note tucked in the same wooden box that had once held his letters. The one he made her years ago, back when all they had was memory and hope. And now hope had taken root. A few of the neighboring farmers who had once viewed Clara's return with suspicion now came by with casseroles and offers of seed swaps. Children who'd once crossed the street to avoid the Wells house now came to feed the goats and listen to Elijah's stories about the healing tree on the ridge. Life, slow and steady, was returning to the land. But beneath it all, the weight of the past remained. Not as a burden, but as a reminder. Some things you carried not to be crushed by them, but so you never forget why you chose to rise. As dusk wrapped the sky in hues of lavender and rust, Clara and Elijah stood hand in hand before the young oak, its fragile trunk braced by wooden stakes, its roots reaching down into freshly turned earth. She leaned into his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think it'll survive the winter? He nodded slowly. It will. It's got deep roots now. Clara closed her eyes, letting the wind pass over her skin like an old friend returning. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the land breathing with her, not in sorrow, but in quiet resolve. This wasn't just about redemption. It was about beginning again. And this time, with both feet on the ground, the fall air smelled like cut hay and possibility. Leaves fell in golden spirals across the farmhouse porch as Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee. Elijah sat on the steps, his boots muddy from the morning's work, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The chickens clucked contentedly in the distance. Clara handed him a mug and sat beside him. "Do you think it'll always feel like this?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like we're still waiting for the storm to come back." He took a slow sip, staring out across the fields. The ravine had been fenced off for environmental crews. Cleanup had started last week. But the weight of it all still hung like dew on their skin. "I think storms change the air," Elijah said. "You never quite breathe the same again." She nodded. That was it exactly. She hadn't spoken to the media in nearly a month. The headlines had quieted, shifting to other scandals, fresher outrages. But the letters kept coming, from farmers across the country, from young activists, from people whose families had once worked land that never bore fruit again. They called her brave. She didn't feel brave. She felt grounded, rooted maybe for the first time. "I have something for you," Elijah said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small piece of folded paper, browned at the edges. "What is it?" "Found it behind the dresser when I was patching the wall. It's your mother's handwriting." Clara opened it slowly. "Elijah, take care of her if she ever comes home. She won't say it, but she's always belonged to this place more than the glass towers. And you've always been the kind of man who sees the soil beneath a person's shoes." Clara's breath caught. "She knew," she whispered. "She always did," Elijah said softly. "So did mine." The silence that followed was deep and full of warmth. After a while, Clara stood and offered her hand. "Come on." "Where to?" "We're going to plant the winter wheat." He raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "Now," she said, already walking toward the shed. And so they did, side by side, fingers in the dirt, laughter mixing with low conversation. The kind of planting that didn't just promise crops, but healing. A quiet kind of joy. That night, Clara sat by the fire writing a letter. Not to a politician, not to a lawyer, to herself. To the version of her who once believed success had to be shiny, fast, and far from home. She folded it neatly, tucked it in the letterbox Elijah had made, and whispered, "We're growing something better now." Snow arrived early in Cedar Grove that year. It came like a whisper, soft, steady, no drama. Just a quiet white veil draping over fence posts, tractor wheels, and the fading stalks of wheat that Clara and Elijah had sown together in the fall. By the second morning, the world looked entirely new. Clara stood by the kitchen window, cradling a steaming mug, watching the sunrise wash gold across the frozen fields. The farmhouse was warmer now, both literally and otherwise. They'd finished insulating the back wall, repainted the old cupboards, and brought the rocking chair in from the barn. It was the first winter Clara hadn't spent in a high-rise. She had forgotten how much silence could heal. Elijah came in from the porch, boots leaving wet imprints on the floor. Cheeks pink, pink from the cold. He shook the snow off his shoulders and gave her a look she had come to know well. That mix of teasing and tenderness. "You're watching the snow again," he said. "I like the quiet." "Thought so." They ate breakfast in the sunroom, wrapped in quilts, pancakes with cinnamon apples. The kind of morning that didn't need conversation. Just the sound of forks scraping plates, firewood crackling, and Max the dog snoring at their feet. Later, they walked the property. The ravine was still roped off, but the EPA had paused cleanup until spring. Clara wasn't sure if that was mercy or bureaucracy, but she'd accepted that even healing had its seasons. They reached the old oak tree and stood beneath its bare limbs. Elijah broke the silence. "You think it remembers?" Clara looked up at the gnarled branches, now wrapped in snow like lace. "I think it never forgot." He slipped his gloved hand into hers. "You're not leaving again, are you?" "No," she said, "not unless it's with you." They stood that way for a long time. That night, the power flickered out during supper. Without a word, Elijah lit the oil lamps. Clara fetched extra blankets. The world outside vanished into soft white, and the farmhouse glowed with its own quiet magic. Later, lying beside him, Clara whispered, "You think we'll ever have kids?" Elijah blinked at the ceiling. "I think if we do, they'll have calluses and opinions." Clara laughed, then turned serious. "I'd want them to know this, the quiet, the good work, the honesty." "They will," he said, "because they'll know you." Outside, the wind howled once before settling into sleep. And inside, the only sound was the rhythm of two hearts, finally beating in time. Spring returned the way it always does, without asking permission. One morning, the frost simply stopped clinging to the window panes. The snow melted quietly into the thirsty soil, and the crows returned to the cedar trees, calling out like messengers of something older than memory. Clara stood barefoot on the porch, a cup of chamomile tea in her hand, watching the early buds appear along the edges of the vegetable beds. Elijah came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Smells like planting season," he murmured. Clara nodded, smiling. "Time to get our hands dirty again." The land was different now, not just in the shape of its fields, but in the way it felt underfoot. It carried the weight of everything they'd unearthed, but also the promise of what they had restored. Wells Foundation representative still checked in every few weeks. Gloria had set up an independent board to oversee corporate transparency. Clara no longer needed to lead from a stage. She led with seeds, with open books, with handshakes at the farmer's market. She'd become something new, something truer. That afternoon, she sat beneath the old oak tree with a stack of envelopes. Letters from across the country, farmers asking for advice, young women who called her Miss Clara and signed off with, "Hope I grow strong like you." She cried a little, not out of sadness, out of something fuller. Gratitude, maybe, or grace. That evening, Elijah lit the grill while Clara baked a pie. Mary and Sarah came over for dinner. Sheriff Emma stopped by with fresh eggs and gossip. It wasn't a celebration, just a Tuesday. But to Clara, it felt like everything she'd been chasing. Later, after dishes and stories and laughter that echoed like music across the fields, she and Elijah sat on the porch again. "I never thought my life would look like this," she said. He looked at her, quiet for a moment. "Is that a good thing?" Clara turned to him. "It's the best thing." He smiled, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small wooden ring box. Her heart caught. "Elijah, it's not about weddings or big speeches," he said. "It's about planting something with you that grows for the rest of our lives." She opened the box. Inside, two simple silver bands, etched with wheat on one, oak leaves on the other. "I figured so," he said softly. "We already said yes the first time we fixed the fence together." Clara's eyes brimmed, and through the open window behind them, the wind stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of tilled earth and new beginnings.